Behind the judge who ordered President Trump's appointee, Lindsay Halligan, to explain why she continues to call herself the U.S. Attorney for the Eastern District of Virginia.
It's all despite a court decision calling her appointment unlawful. Fox 5 chief legal correspondent host of In the...
Okay, so let me tell you about the specific moment that represents the single most consequential development in the entire 2020 election accountability story, and why it is specifically more alarming for Donald Trump's legal position than almost anything else that has surfaced in the documented evidentiary landscape so far. Mark Meadows, who served as Trump's own chief of staff, occupied the absolute most central position inside the Trump White House throughout the entire period from the November 2020 election through the events of January 6th. He had direct access to every sensitive communication that flowed through the administration, every internal planning discussion that took place behind closed doors, and every real-time response that the highest levels of the executive branch crafted in reaction to the most consequential events unfolding in those critical weeks and months. This was not some mid-level aide or distant advisor. This was the person who sat at the very heart of decision-making, coordinating with Trump himself on a daily basis, reviewing memos, handling calls, and managing the flow of information that shaped the administration's strategy during one of the most turbulent periods in modern American political history. That same individual was granted immunity by special counsel Jack Smith. And according to credible reporting from ABC News, he has already spoken multiple times with federal prosecutors specifically about Trump's efforts to overturn the results of the 2020 presidential election. This is not speculation or rumor. It is real, verified reporting from a major news outlet that has documented and confirmed the existence of this immunity arrangement and the substance of those conversations. When a figure like Meadows, who was immersed in every room, every call, and every text exchange during the most sensitive stretch of this entire saga, decides to cooperate under immunity, it fundamentally shifts the terrain in ways that no amount of public statements or peripheral testimony could ever achieve. Think about what this means in practical terms. Meadows was not just an observer, he was the gatekeeper. He read thousands of messages, participated in strategy sessions about electoral challenges, and was copied on communications that touched on everything from alternate elector plans to pressure campaigns aimed at state officials and even the vice president. His cooperation under immunity means he can now provide prosecutors with detailed sworn accounts of those private discussions without fear of self-incrimination, filling in gaps that documents alone might leave open. ABC News laid out the specifics clearly, and while some other outlets like CNN have noted they have not independently confirmed every detail yet, the core fact of the immunity grant and the multiple interviews stands as a documented milestone. This development carries far more weight than almost any other piece of evidence because it comes from the one person who had the broadest and deepest view of the inner workings of the Trump orbit at the exact time when the most serious legal questions were being debated and acted upon. It is the kind of insider testimony that prosecutors dream about in complex conspiracy cases because it transforms abstract allegations into concrete, first-hand narratives that juries can understand and weigh directly. Now, before we dive even deeper into the layers of this story, let us take a moment to acknowledge something important about how information circulates in today's media environment. You cannot always rely on mainstream outlets to deliver the full picture without some degree of corporate influence or selective framing, which is exactly why independent platforms like Pump Politics exist in the first place. We built this space to cut through the noise and bring you unfiltered stories, genuine context, and zero spin from big media conglomerates. If you want to stay ahead of the curve on these fast-moving developments, I strongly encourage you to join our free newsletter. It lands straight in your inbox every single day with the latest updates, analysis, and insights that matter most. Just click the link in the description or wherever you are watching this to sign up right now. And if you feel moved to support the work we are doing here, consider becoming part of our community. It is a group of people who genuinely care about digging for the truth rather than chasing clicks or narratives. With that said, let us return to the substance at hand and unpack why Meadows' situation is reshaping the accountability landscape in such a profound manner. Let us begin by examining the specific documented scope of what Meadows has already contributed and what prosecutors have already secured, because the foundation here rests entirely on real, reported facts from reliable sources, instead of vague guesses about what might come later. More than 2,000 text messages from Meadows' own devices were turned over to the January 6th Congressional Committee. These are not random notes or casual chatter. They represent real-time, contemporaneous communications captured during the heat of the moment from the Chief of Staff's personal and official channels. They cover the most sensitive and legally charged periods, documenting everything from planning around the January 6th events to urgent appeals made while the Capitol was under siege. Among them are messages about placing the National Guard on standby for that day, which demonstrate that Meadows and the White House had advance awareness of potential security risks and operational needs well before the rally even began. There are also coordination exchanges with organizers of the rally that preceded the Capitol breach, showing direct links between the administration and the logistics of the gathering. And perhaps most damaging of all, there are urgent texts sent to Trump himself during the attack, pleading with him to intervene and call off the rioters who had stormed the building. These are not after-the-fact recollections. They are frozen-in-time records of what was actually said and known as events unfolded, creating a contemporaneous paper trail that is extraordinarily difficult to explain away or reinterpret. These texts already sit in the official record of the January 6th committee proceedings. Credible outlets have reported on their contents, and legal experts who have reviewed them have assessed their significance in detail. They are not hypothetical discoveries waiting to happen. They are established evidence whose implications have been analyzed by former prosecutors and analysts who understand how such materials play out in court. But the immunity deal itself adds an entirely new and even more consequential layer. When prosecutors grant immunity to a key witness like this, and that witness then engages in multiple sessions with the investigation team focused precisely on the conduct under scrutiny, the testimony becomes specific, sworn, and immediately usable in building the strongest possible case. Immunity strips away the Fifth Amendment shield that would otherwise let someone refuse to answer questions about their own potential exposure. In Meadows' case, his central role in coordination, communication, and planning makes his compelled statements incredibly valuable because they speak directly to the heart of the most serious charges being pursued. The combination of those 2,000-plus texts with sworn immunity interviews creates a dual-track evidentiary foundation that is both public and private, documented and testimonial, leaving far fewer avenues for defense teams to challenge the overall narrative. This immunity plus multiple interviews dynamic stands out as particularly threatening to Trump's position because it places the individual with the most comprehensive insider knowledge squarely in the prosecutor's corner, delivering that knowledge under formal sworn conditions. It is not casual conversation. It is structured cooperation that can be introduced in legal proceedings with full credibility. Now consider the Georgia RICO case as another critical dimension here. Meadows attempted to remove that state-level prosecution to federal court, arguing it belonged in a different venue, but the judge rejected that move outright. This rejection carries enormous legal weight because it signals that the arguments for federal protection did not hold up under scrutiny. The same theories Meadows relied upon are the ones Trump's own legal team has explored for similar purposes, so this ruling serves as a direct preview of how those strategies are likely to fare when applied to other defendants in the same matter. The Georgia proceedings, structured under the RICO statute, are uniquely suited to handle complex, multi-defendant coordinated efforts like the alleged scheme to overturn election results in that state. RICO allows prosecutors to treat the entire enterprise as a single criminal operation, holding participants accountable for the broader pattern of acts rather than forcing them to prove every single isolated action for each person. Meadows' central involvement in that enterprise, now paired with his federal immunity cooperation, amplifies the prosecution's ability to connect dots across the full scope of activity. Let us zoom in even closer on one particular piece from those texts that has drawn intense focus: the messages about having the National Guard on standby for January 6th. This is not some minor logistical note. It is contemporaneous documentation showing that senior White House leadership possessed specific advance awareness of the security context and planning for that day. It directly confronts one of the most hotly contested factual questions in the entire January 6th story. What exactly did the top levels of the administration know ahead of time about the risks and expectations? A text from Meadows on this topic creates powerful evidence that the narrative of complete surprise or lack of preparation simply does not align with the internal records. Contemporaneous communications like this carry exceptional evidentiary power because they capture private thoughts and plans in the moment, unfiltered by later self-justification or memory reconstruction. They reveal what was actually understood and acted upon at the time, making them far more persuasive than retrospective testimony alone. When you layer this onto the broader corpus of 2,000 messages, including rally coordination and real-time pleas to stop the violence, the picture that emerges is one of deep White House entanglement in the events leading up to and during the Capitol attack. To truly grasp the full magnitude of this development, it helps to break it down into three core analytical dimensions, each building on the others to paint a complete portrait. The first dimension centers on the documented evidentiary landscape itself, encompassing those 2,000 texts, the immunity cooperation with Jack Smith's team, and the ongoing Georgia RICO proceedings. Each category contributes something unique and irreplaceable to the overall picture of the 2020 election overturn efforts and the January 6th accountability story. The texts provide the raw, time-stamped record of communications, showing who was talking to whom, when, and about what. They establish timelines, intentions, and awareness levels through direct quotes from the participants. The immunity testimony then fills in the contextual gaps, what was said in rooms without texts, what the underlying strategies and understandings were, and how decisions were reached beyond the written exchanges. Together, they form a seamless, comprehensive evidentiary web that prosecutors can weave into arguments for conspiracy, obstruction, and related charges. The Georgia RICO element adds the structural framework that ties it all together under state law, allowing the full enterprise to be prosecuted as a unified whole rather than fragmented pieces. The second dimension involves the profound significance of an inner circle flip in a case of this complexity. When someone as deeply embedded as the chief of staff begins cooperating, it delivers something documentary evidence can never fully replicate: the insider roadmap to motivations, agreements, and unspoken understandings. Documents reveal what was written or said aloud in certain channels, but a witness who was physically present in every key meeting, on every critical call, and reading every relevant memo can explain the real intent behind those words, the nods of approval that never made it into writing, and the collective decisions that drove the actions. Meadows' position gave him unparalleled visibility into the decision-making process during the most pivotal weeks. His ability to articulate that for prosecutors under oath represents the highest value resource available in any multi-defendant conspiracy investigation. It is not just additional testimony, it is the key that unlocks the entire sequence of events from the perspective of the person closest to the center of power. This kind of cooperation from the innermost circle carries consequences that peripheral witnesses simply cannot match because it penetrates the protective layers that often shield higher-ups in such cases. The third dimension focuses squarely on the Georgia RICO framework and why its legal design makes it especially potent for addressing the kind of coordinated, multi-layered conduct alleged here. The racketeer-influenced and corrupt organization statute was crafted precisely for dismantling organized enterprises where multiple people contribute to a shared criminal goal. In the Fulton County context, it permits prosecutors to charge every participant in the alleged scheme to subvert Georgia's election results as part of one overarching enterprise. Evidence about the group's overall activities can then be used to establish individual guilt without needing to isolate each defendant's actions in a vacuum. Meadows' role in that enterprise, coordinating communications, facilitating pressure efforts, and engaging with key players, positions his cooperation as a force multiplier for the entire prosecution. When combined with the judge's rejection of his federal removal bid, it creates a precedent that weakens similar escape attempts by other defendants, including Trump. The removal effort rested on claims that the conduct qualified as official federal duties protected by the Supremacy Clause, but the court's ruling determined that those arguments did not meet the legal threshold. That same analysis applies with even greater force to the conduct of the former president, who directed and oversaw the broader efforts, establishing a clear judicial marker that future motions will have to contend with. Building on these foundations, the failed federal removal attempt deserves its own focused examination because it offers the most concrete judicial signal yet about how these legal strategies will be received in the Georgia venue. The defense theory was that state charges should yield to federal court due to the official nature of the actions, but the judge's detailed rejection dismantled that premise in the specific context of the election-related conduct. This outcome is not abstract. It directly previews the fate of parallel arguments from co-defendants. If Meadows' extensive involvement in planning, communicating, and executing the alleged scheme did not rise to the level of protected federal duties, then the even more central directing role played by Trump faces the same uphill battle under identical legal standards in the same courthouse. It narrows the defense playbook significantly and forces a reckoning with the state-level forum that Georgia prosecutors deliberately chose as the appropriate arena for accountability. Let us now synthesize everything into 4 clear, concrete points so that the full implications stand out with maximum clarity. First, the documented combination of more than 2,000 contemporaneous texts, detailing National Guard standby awareness, rally coordination, and real-time urgings to Trump to halt the rioters, paired with the reported immunity cooperation and multiple interviews with Jack Smith's team, produces the most comprehensively documented and legally alarming evidentiary transformation in the entire 2020 election accountability narrative. These texts establish the public timeline and content of communications with precision, while the sworn immunity testimony supplies the private interpretive layer that reveals intentions, understandings, and agreements. No single category of evidence could achieve this level of depth on its own, but together they create an interlocking foundation that reaches into the innermost operations of the administration. This is documentation from Trump's own chief of staff, the person entrusted with the most sensitive information and closest to the president, which makes the penetration of that inner circle especially devastating to traditional defense narratives that seek to distance leadership from operational details. Second, the inner circle flip represented by Meadows' immunity cooperation carries broader importance than any peripheral cooperation could because his specific centrality, present in every room, on every call, reviewing every relevant communication, equips prosecutors with the most exhaustive insider roadmap possible to the decision-making, planning, and coordination that define the most serious conduct at issue. Documents can show the surface-level exchanges, but only a witness of Meadows' stature can illuminate the unspoken dynamics, the strategic rationales, and the collective buy-in that turned plans into actions. This roadmap is the single most valuable prosecutorial asset in complex conspiracy matters, and its source as the former chief of staff elevates its impact to the highest possible degree. It directly undermines efforts to portray events as disconnected or uninformed at the top, providing the connective tissue that links disparate pieces into a coherent, provable whole. Third, the Georgia RICO framework stands as the most comprehensively powerful legal structure available for tackling the intricate, multi-defendant coordinated conduct alleged in the 2020 Georgia election overturn efforts, and the federal removal rejection supplies the most directly applicable judicial precedent for assessing identical theories from other co-defendants. By treating the entire operation as a single enterprise, RICO enables the prosecution to leverage the full spectrum of evidence against each participant without artificial fragmentation. Meadows' central position within that enterprise, now augmented by his federal cooperation, delivers insider evidence that strengthens every element of the case. The removal rejection, by establishing that the conduct does not qualify for federal shielding, binds future arguments to the same restrictive standard, creating a unified accountability architecture that is exceptionally difficult to fracture or evade. Fourth, as these proceedings continue to unfold, several specific developments will reveal exactly how Meadows' evidence is being deployed and how the cases are progressing toward their most significant outcomes. Keep a close eye on the federal election interference proceedings for any signs that his immunity testimony is being woven into evidentiary presentations or legal motions, particularly where it challenges core defense claims about knowledge, intent, or involvement. Monitor the Georgia RICO case calendar for trial date advancements or scheduling shifts that indicate when this comprehensive accountability vehicle is accelerating toward full evidentiary deployment. Watch for additional cooperation signals from other co-defendants in both Georgia and federal matters, as Meadows' move could trigger a cascade where one insider's testimony encourages further flips and deeper documentation of the coordinated efforts. And pay attention to credible legal commentary analyzing the specific categories of Meadows' evidence, because those assessments from experienced observers will clarify the precise weight being assigned to the texts, the interviews, and the RICO structure in shaping the most serious charges. Here is the absolute bottom line that you should carry forward from all of this analysis. ABC News has reported that Mark Meadows received immunity from Jack Smith and has engaged in multiple conversations with prosecutors concerning Trump's efforts to overturn the 2020 election. More than 2,000 contemporaneous texts preserve his advanced awareness of National Guard planning, his communications coordinating the rally, and his direct pleas to Trump to stop the rioters as they unfolded. The Georgia RICO case's rejection of federal removal sets a binding precedent that applies to every other co-defendant's similar attempts within the same proceeding. The fusion of that extensive public documentary record with private, sworn immunity testimony from the president's own chief of staff generates the most comprehensively documented and specifically legally alarming shift in the 2020 election accountability evidentiary landscape that has emerged to date. No responsible prosecutor would ever claim a guaranteed outcome because honest legal evaluation never permits absolute predictions. Yet the documented reality of immunity cooperation from the most central insider, combined with the largest available contemporaneous text archive and the specially engineered RICO accountability mechanism, has produced the most dramatically altered evidentiary environment the serious 2020 election proceedings have yet encountered. The evidence is not theoretical or forthcoming. It is already documented and in hand. The cooperation is real and ongoing. The RICO structure was literally designed for precisely this scale of complex, multi-defendant coordinated activity, and the inner circle flip that Meadows' involvement represents stands as the single most consequential evidentiary breakthrough possible in any intricate conspiracy prosecution of this nature. We will continue to track every single development as the Meadows cooperation and both the Georgia and federal proceedings advance toward their most consequential phases. The transformation is not subtle or incremental. It is foundational and far-reaching, reshaping the terrain in ways that demand careful, ongoing attention from anyone following the pursuit of accountability. Drop a comment below and share your thoughts on whether this documented cooperation delivers the evidentiary impact that the immunity arrangement and text corpus most clearly support, or whether other resolutions might emerge before the full weight of that insider testimony reaches its ultimate deployment in court. The story is still unfolding, but the pieces already in place point to a level of documentation and cooperation that few anticipated at the outset of these investigations. To expand further on the depth of Meadows' access and why it matters so profoundly, consider the daily reality of a chief of staff's role in any White House. They are the ultimate coordinator, the filter through which information reaches the president and the executor of high-level directives. During the post-election period, this meant Meadows was handling incoming reports on vote counts, legal challenges, and public messaging strategies, while simultaneously managing internal debates about certification deadlines and alternate pathways. His texts alone capture fragments of that frenzy, but the immunity interviews allow him to contextualize those fragments with live explanations of what Trump said in private, how responses were formulated, and what assumptions guided the team's actions. This is the kind of testimony that can turn a collection of messages into a narrative prosecutors can present as a unified story of intent and execution. making it exponentially harder for defenses to argue isolation or lack of awareness. Delving deeper into the National Guard standby texts reveals layers of operational foresight that challenge claims of reactive chaos. These messages indicate proactive discussions about military readiness for a day when large crowds were expected in Washington, suggesting that risks were not only anticipated but prepared for at the highest levels.